Hello, Americans. I'm Kent McNall. It's August 13th, 2023, and it's Constitution time. It's been over 2 years since I last spoke those words. Back before the election in 2020, I really felt compelled to do something to talk about what I felt was happening with our democracy and our Constitution at that time. And the angle that I took was the constitutional angle, to create this show to talk a bit about the Constitution and some of the things that were happening that were kind of constitutional related at that time, some of the threats to the Constitution and to democracy. And democracy had a rough ride at that time that included some action on the Supreme Court, including the death of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, which created an imbalance. The election itself, which created for the first time true conflict over an election and whether the election was properly conducted. And then, of course, January 6th, which raised many, many constitutional issues. And we made it through that period. But now, 2 years later, we again find ourselves in a very similar situation where the edges and the core of our Constitution are once again facing a lot of challenges. So I decided to come back and bring Constitution Time Season 2 back. And so I welcome you to the very first episode of Season 2. I decided on a theme for this season, which is thinking as Americans. And I want to explain what I mean by that. The most obvious thing I would hope to help make happen for some people is that rather than thinking in a partisan way only as Democrats and Republicans, that we think instead as Americans, from an American perspective, and what's good for our country and our children, rather than just what's good for our party. Now, there's lots of different perspectives that we can all choose to think from. We can think as human beings. We can think as, citizens of the universe. But I think what is helpful now and what we need now is a perspective as Americans first. Here's the first thing that I want to throw out for all of us to think about a bit, which is, have you yourself sat down and thought about, with your own thoughts, not just listening to the talking heads, what our lives would be like without our democracy? Just think about that for a second. What would our lives be like without our democracy? And in saying that, I'm really talking about without our Constitution, because when we talk about losing our democracy, what that really means is losing our Constitution. So imagine your life without the Constitution, without the protections of the Constitution, without a right to free speech, free assembly, without the things that we all take for granted. And that's a pretty scary thought, because I'm a citizen of the world, and I look around at other forms of government, especially those that are not democratic in nature. And I don't see any really good examples of anything that I would hope to live under, a system of government that I would want to live under. There are no good autocrats running a country that's well thought of by its citizens and by the other countries of the world. We think of China, we think of Russia, we think of the many, many small countries that are under a dictatorship and not under democracy. But when you think about it, it's very difficult to imagine that we would ever want to go there, because it's not just our freedoms that would be at risk. Our position in the world would be very much at risk. our financial markets would very likely collapse and not recover very well if our way of life, if our democracy were really suborned and changed into something else. We would live in a very, very different world. And I have not heard anyone directly say that they want to get rid of democracy, but there are a lot of actions that would lead you to believe that some people are thinking that way, that they think that other things are more important than having democracy. I don't think anything's more important than that, especially when I think about my kids and the grandkids that I hope to have one day. When we think as Americans, I think another thing that's going to jump out at us is we've got to find better ways to communicate with each other. We are very divided. We all know that. There are many forces at work, I think, dividing us, and they're not hard to see. Media, social media are some very, very obvious ones. But even some of our own elected officials seem very bent on division. So we've got to find ways to talk to each other. Now, I belong to a small group of people that meet every 2 weeks. And literally, that's what we've been doing for the last 2 or 3 years, is talking about how can we get people together? You know, how can we get people to even talk to each other? Because if you're like me, even with your closest friends and family, if you're on one side of the political divide and they're on the other, it doesn't take that much to really get to a place you don't want to be when you're talking to loved ones and people that you care about in your life. So a lot of us just avoid talking about it at all because it's very difficult to do so. But there are a lot of things that we all can agree on. And some of them are the problems that we face, especially related to our government and our politics. You know, there's lots of things to not be happy about with our government. But many of those things have been going on for a very, very long time, and they're not going to go away anytime soon. Some of them are sharper today because some of the problems of the world are getting bigger. But things like big government and too much taxation, ineffective government, departments that don't seem to do their jobs very well, these are things that are real problems, and that I don't blame anyone for feeling dissatisfied with them. I think that some of what's happening today in the world, climate change and that kind of thing, make those problems bigger than they have been in the past. Politically, we have a lot of challenges, and our greatest divisions are political. You know, we've entered an era where our Supreme Court is not what we're used to it being for us. You know, I have often thought of the Supreme Court, no matter what was going on with it, as a bastion of justice and fairness and that type of thing. And it's become very obviously, much more one-sided than we're used to for the last many decades. And, the circumstances that coming about, that is what it is. It was inevitable that one day a combination of events would possibly create a one-sided Supreme Court. But in addition to that, we have challenges relating to ethics in the Supreme Court. And we're being basically told by the justices of the Supreme Court that, yeah, you can't do anything about it. So these are cracks in our constitutional form of government. And that's another thing that we really face politically, is there seems to be a lot of folks working to find and widen the cracks in our constitutional system. Our Constitution is an amazing thing, but it does have some soft spots, and they're being found, and they're being exploited. And that's one of the real challenges that we face. Politically, we're in an environment where extremists on both sides are making it very hard to govern, creating situations that are very harmful to our country. We just went through a debt ceiling increase, which is quote unquote normally a routine thing. And even though the problems that came from that were not, I mean, the actual process didn't happen in the worst way it's ever happened, but it dropped our credit rating, which affects our economy, which affects the stock market. So these divisions that show up politically in our government have real immediate impacts on us and on our daily life. So these things are in fact happening. Politically, we're in an environment where the bodies of government, the three branches of government, are creating their own rules that are stopping up the works. We're used to things like, filibusters. That's been around for a long time, but things have been taken to extremes such that, a Senate rule currently has one senator blocking every nomination for political advancement in our military ranks. Our military folks are not able to advance. So, things like this keep happening. It's one of the ways that the Supreme Court is the makeup that it has, because one party in the Senate, even though a minority, was able to prevent a normal process from happening because of the Senate's rules. And these things happen on, again, both parties can take advantage of that, so that we no longer have majority rule, we have minority rule. So there are very legitimate things for people to be concerned about, whether you're on the right or whether you're on the left. And we can all stand shoulder to shoulder on some of those things. They're not things that have to divide us. And those things which do divide us, we've got to work on those too. But we can start with the things that we see the same way. America has a lot that we need to accomplish. We cannot sit on our hands on many, many things. I'm watching, as I'm sure you are, and my heart goes out very, very much to the people in Lahaina on the island of Maui in Hawaii. For Ann and I, Hawaii has become our second home, and we have a home there. It's not on that island. It's on the island of Kauai. But, maybe it's just an accident, but maybe it's part of the climate change that's been affecting all of us this summer especially. We have big things that we need to accomplish as a country, and we have a lot of work to make those things happen. And one of the biggest threats, I think, to democracy is the loggerheads that we're at, the divisions that we're allowing to keep us from accomplishing things that need to be accomplished, that we really need to work on. We've got to solve the immigration problem. It's not going to go away by itself. The immigration at its heart at its root is caused by a lot more people on this planet. And that's not going to reverse anytime soon. So we've got to have a solution, and we've got to have it together. One party is not going to be able to create the solution by itself. So getting together, finding ways to talk to each other is of paramount importance to all of us. And we've got to find a way, basically, to be honest, to control ourselves, to control our tempers, so that we can talk to each other, so that we don't have to go into this place when we start to discuss these issues and head into an election and go through things that, generations of Americans have gone through for, 200 years plus, that we can't get them done because we're just letting ourselves be so divided. And I do feel part of what we need to do is recognize those things which are dividing us. We've been hearing for a long time about, hey, when I say something, all of a sudden I start seeing advertisement about it. Well, that's very real, folks. And it's happening not only when you speak into your phone, but when you speak around your TV, any computer at all. And that information is not being used benignly in all cases. It's being used to present content to you, which is maybe making you angry, definitely making us divided. So, we've got to recognize that is in fact happening. And A lot of people I know, they handle it by, saying, I don't watch news, I don't watch TV. And that is a solution. But we've all got to be connected too, because we all got to be part of, you know, actively working to keep our democracy intact to the greatest degree that we can. So, in this second season of Constitution Time, I'll be exploring many topics. I'll be doing my best to try to keep things nonpartisan, to not, just go from my perspective, which I admit is on the left, to attack the right. But I will say that at least one episode, which is the next episode, the topic is, who do we want in leadership? What are the parameters that we want to have when we are selecting a leader? What makes a good leader? What makes a bad leader? That's something I think that many, many of us are asking ourselves right now for many reasons. The two front runners in our upcoming election have some aspects of themselves which are not attractive to many of the voters that are going to be out there. So that one episode perhaps will feel a little partisan, but I'm looking forward to many opinions on it. By the way, as part of the Constitution Time, if you get on, you can chat. There's a chat interface. With my vision, it's a little tough for me to participate in chat, but I'm just going to kind of type something into chat right now. So I'm hoping that if we actually get an audience built up and rebuilt from the last time we did this, that we'll have an opportunity for people to interact. And I'm certainly open to suggestions and ideas of topics that you'd like to cover or not cover. And your ideas also on how can we communicate with each other better? How can we bridge the gulf of this division that is between us? And work, start trying to create a mindset that will let us work together as Americans and think like Americans. Just the last couple of words on thinking like Americans. Certainly one thing that I thought in saying, hey, let's think like Americans, is to think like the original Americans, the people that wrote the Declaration of Independence, who lived through the Revolutionary War and fought against what they saw as tyranny from the king in England. And, those folks were pretty interesting human beings. They were not any one thing that you might think they were. They were not all religious. Some of them were Unitarians. Some of them did not believe in God at all, but they definitely believed in freedom of religion. So they were a pretty interesting crew, but they were fiercely independent, and they believed in the idea of America. And if we still believe in the idea of America, then we've got to find a way to do what they did, to overcome their differences, which were in some cases very deep and even violent, and stand shoulder to shoulder to accomplish what we need to accomplish. And again, there's a lot we need to accomplish. We've got many of our aspects of our lives that are not where they've been all my lifetime. And then we need to get them back where they need to be. Education. I mentioned we've got to handle the problems with immigration and the border, and we've got to do that in a humane way, a fair way, as fair a way as we can devise, but one that doesn't leave the border open as it seems to be right now. We've got to overcome some of the political problems. I'd like to see constitutional amendments